Welcome back to the Pro Wrestling Push Me poll for May 1990, wrestling's only objective, weighted, data-driven ranking system based on which pro wrestlers were getting the biggest push across the industry in terms of big matches wrestled and titles held. And after 4 months of domination from the WWF, NWA World Champion Ric Flair is ranked number one for May in what was quite a quiet, low-scoring month overall. Not because the NWA was suddenly the bigger promotion in North America, it was still a long way behind the WWF. The NWA just had a pay-per-view supercard in May, Capital Combat, while the WWF had a bit of a low-key rebuilding month post-WrestleMania 6. The competing WWF NWA supercards of the last few years had given way to a kind of unwritten rule of not directly promoting shows against each other for a bit, not least because the WWF had by this point soundly and clearly won that war. So May was essentially WWF's cool-down window after WrestleMania 6, while the NWA had a big show to promote, Capital Combat 90, the return of RoboCop. After the booking committee chaos of the last few months, with big wrestling minds such as Ric Flair and Jim Cornette quitting in frustration over TBS meddling, Ole Anderson had been named as the company's new booker. The good news of that was there was now a clear person in charge of booking decisions. The bad news was that since his glory days in Georgia Championship Wrestling, Ole had become really out of touch with what the fans were after and happy to apparently just do what Jim Herd wanted, which was to appeal more to kids and be more like the WWF in order to grow the audience, the absolute opposite of what the NWA's core fan base wanted the company to be as a viable alternative to the WWF. So at Capital Combat, you had quite a confused feeling card. On one hand, you had the culmination of Ric Flair versus Lex Luger in at number 3 in the May top 10, in a quote-unquote brutal steel cage match main event to keep the Horsemen from interfering. And on the other, you had a really cheesy movie tie-in with Sting back in the top 10 at number 7, even though he was still rehabbing his injured knee because he was all over WCW TV this month, bringing in RoboCop, and yes, this was completely seriously presented by Gordon Solie, no less, as actual RoboCop, half man, half machine, to promote the release of RoboCop 2, to help Sting help his new buddy Luger and keep the Horsemen from getting the belt back on Flair, or keeping it on Flair rather. Look, this wasn't the first time cheesy kid-focused stuff like this had found its way onto WCW television, but it was the first time it was impacting the main event scene and the company's lead storyline, and it really turned a lot of long-time old-school fans off what the NWA was selling at this time. Nonetheless, this was what was happening in May 1990, and NWA World Champion Ric Flair retained his world title over US Champion Lex Luger in the cage match main event of Capital Combat, but not without a lot of shenanigans. Up until the conclusion, it was a pretty good match, to be fair. Flair and Luger always had really good chemistry. This was touted as Luger's last shot against Flair for the NWA title, as match after match these last few months had ended inconclusively with interference from the Horsemen. Arn and Ole Anderson, Ole was now essentially in a manager role, having added the returning Barry Windham as well as Sid Vicious to the stable as the new Horsemen. Arn and Windham were acting as the Horsemen's new tag team and come in at number 8 this month in the top 10. Sid was still coming off an injury, so was mainly just standing in the background looking menacing at this point. And at the start of the match, Luger just dominates Flair with high-impact power moves, which the fans were coming unglued for. Luger's fired up and no-sells Flair's eye pokes and chops, taking the champion to the old-school cage bars and busting him open. And watching this match back, even knowing Luger had just been a placeholder program until Sting was better, it felt like a genuine changing of the guard moment, and in retrospect, maybe they could and maybe should have put Luger over for the belt here. He may have been more ready for it than Sting turned out to be. But in the end, just as it looks like Luger is on his way to a win, the Horsemen come down to ringside and try to get in the cage. But Sting and the debuting 7'7" Argentinian basketball player El Gigante I mean, hey, at least it wasn't Robocop, chase the bad guys off. Ole then somehow finds the cage mechanism to raise the entire cage structure, allowing Arn and Windham in to help Flair beat up Luger, and that's your cheap, inconclusive DQ finish to the match. Eventually the cage is raised, again allowing Sting and El Gigante to chase off the Horsemen, but a bloody Flair escapes with his NWA title intact yet again. And that was that for Lex Luger's latest unsuccessful tilt at the big gold belt, because Flair's next challenge on the road to the inevitable Sting showdown would be dusting off the Junkyard Dog, the veteran being brought back from obscurity under Booker Ole Anderson and aiming to become the first black world champion. JYD would face Flair at Clash of the Champions 11 next month in a match that was, well, it was not as good as Flair's matches against Luger and Sting this year. Bubbling under for the NWA in May, the team of Doom, Butch Reed and Ron Simmons, now being managed by Teddy Long, upset the Steiner brothers to win the World Tag Team titles in a great match at the pay-per-view. So that's the NWA in May 1990. What was going on in the WWF? So new WWF champion, the Ultimate Warrior, was surprisingly only number 2 this month after his huge torch passing moment last month, beating Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6. And it was kind of shocking how absent he was on WWF TV this month outside of recaps of his big win, and house show attendance absolutely fell off a cliff. Previous years had tended to see a drop-off in houses post-WrestleMania, but this year just tanked, particularly in relation to the great business they'd been doing at the start of the year. And fairly or unfairly, it was kind of hard not to immediately hang that on Warrior. They started a slow build for Warrior's first big title program with a series of training videos with ravishing Rick Rude preparing to come after Warrior and the world title, to beat him the same way he had last year for the Intercontinental title. But Warrior vs. Rude did not feel like a top-line program at this point, not least because the two of them had been feuding in the mid-card just a few months previously, and Warrior had convincingly won that program. So where was the threat from Rude, essentially? The company's real big program clearly still revolved around the former champion Hulk Hogan, who was attacked on the Brother Love show by Earthquake, who took him out with a series of chair shots and hit multiple Earthquake splashes on the Hulkster, Hogan getting taken out on a stretcher and selling the injuries as massive to A, put Earthquake over as the company's new monster, and B, give Hogan those well-earned few months off that he wanted. So yes, Warrior was ostensibly the new face of the company, but the company was still kind of revolving around Hogan and Hogan's feud against Earthquake, even though Hogan had been written off TV. So Rude is number 9 this month, while Mr. Perfect, in at number 10, won the vacant WWF Intercontinental title that Warrior had given up after winning the world title. Perfect won a tournament, beating Tito Santana in the final. Kind of a consolation prize for Perfect after getting convincingly beat by Hogan over the last few months. And bubbling under the top 10 for the WWF this month were the new tag team champions Demolition, Axe and Smash, working a face versus face program against the Hart Foundation, but acting increasingly heelish again in doing so. For All Japan, Jumbo Tsuruta remained AJPW Triple Crown champion and comes in at number 4 for me, having successfully defended against the departing Genichiro Tenryu last month, with Steve Williams and Terry Gordy, the Miracle Violence connection, bubbling under as the foreign tag team champions. The big news coming out of All Japan this month, though, was that the popular Tiger Mask 2 had forsworn his mask and began competing under his real name, Mitsuharu Misawa. And I want to talk about a 6-man tag team match at Korakuen Hall that I'm naming as my match of the month for May. Misawa's alliance with All Japan's other young guns would eventually come to be known as the Super Generation Army, but for now, Misawa, Kenta Kobashi and Akira Taue were just 3 young guys going up against the established company veterans of Jumbo Tsuruta, the Great Kabuki and Masanobu Fuji. This 6-man tag is a great match, which I'll post a link to in the description, that started to set the tone for Misawa moving up the card to fill the gap left by Tenryu's surprise departure last month. Tsuruta taking on the role of the grumpy veteran in no mood to let the younger generation come through. Jumbo bullies and harasses Kenta and Taue, but Misawa's having none of it and stands up to the elder statesman with a series of knee strikes, leading to Jumbo just levelling Misawa with a lariat. And shortly afterwards, while Jumbo's on the apron, Misawa gives him a receipt and knocks the ace silly with a hard elbow strike that leaves Jumbo knocked out on the floor. Tsuruta eventually recovers and just goes for Misawa, and the match feels like it's genuinely breaking down as the disdain the two have for each other boils over. The referee and the other competitors keep having to pull Tsuruta and Misawa apart, whether they're the legal men in the match or not. And eventually order is restored and Jumbo slumps to the floor again, holding his head and selling Misawa's elbow strike fantastically. And this is just coming across like a very bad-tempered match between the old guys and young guys now. Misawa showing Jumbo zero deference and Jumbo treating the young guns with disdain and contempt whenever he's in the ring. There's a point where Jumbo just looks crushed as Kobashi kicks out of a lariat, as if he can sense his star is fading, and this is such a great nuanced performance from Jumbo. After a great action-packed closing stretch, Misawa hits a Tiger Driver on Fuchi, which Jumbo saves with a lariat, but a second Tiger Driver from Misawa wins the match for the young pretenders. Again, this was just a great six-man tag, signalling Misawa's arrival into All Japan's upper tier, much more of which next month at the big Budokan Hall show. Just really good stuff going back and watching All Japan from this time period, and I'd encourage people to watch the video links both this month and in future months. So closing out May's top 10, Jerry Lawler at number 5 regained the USWA title, his 6th USWA reign and counting, from an aging Boogie Woogie man Jimmy Valiant in a retread of their past runs in Memphis. The USWA still had a claim, just about, of being a national promotion at this point, having kind of broken away from the AWA and merged the Memphis and Dallas territories last year, while Lawler was still claiming to be AWA champion. But there was definitely an increasing lack of coherence between the two branches of the promotion, with the Dallas bit of the territory run by the Von Erichs not recognising the frequent Memphis title changes, and Lawler focusing far more on his home Memphis territory than he was on Dallas. And this fragile USWA alliance would continue for now, but spoiler, it was not going to last the year. New Japan's IWGP champion Big Van Vader was at number 6 and mainly working six-man tags as he recovered from his eye surgery, though he did not chop a non-title win over sumo star Koji Kitao. Elsewhere for New Japan, veteran Riki Choshu was continuing to be booked strongly, and outside the top 10, the AWA champion Larry Zbyszko, now in his second reign, beat Nikita Koloff at Twin Wars 90 in St. Paul, but this would be the final show the AWA ever presented from their home arena, and the once mighty Minneapolis territory was now teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. So there we go, that's the Push Me Pull top 10 for May. It was safe to say both major North American companies had entered a period of change at this point, with the WWF now running on warrior power and the NWA making slightly cringe moves to try to appeal to a younger demographic in its latest attempt to close the gap to the WWF. So please do like, share, subscribe and support this channel, and see you next time to find out what was going on across the wrestling landscape in June 1990. Cheers!